Hello everyone, and welcome to another mini sky tonight. So I had a viewer ask me to cover over the broad topic known as celestial navigation, how to use the stars to navigate by. And needless to say, this was not an easy feat. Every TED Talk, lecture, every video, or every academic paper I had come across, it was a broad topic. In fact, every academic paper I had come across was several 30 to 40 pages long, and every book was just about as long, and every lecture I had come across was over 2 hours. In fact, many TED Talks, which are known to be roughly about 30 to 45 minutes, this one particular TED Talk that talked about celestial navigation and modern uses was over an hour and a half. So this was not a topic for the faint of heart. This is a very deep and broad topic that you have to invest in. So today I'm going to cover over just the bare basics of it, to cover over the history of it and some of the ideas of that you can go into it before you consider, hey, I really want to learn more about it. And in fact, if you are interested in this topic, I highly recommend doing some research on it. It is a wonderful topic and very useful and practical. So some of the history, believe it or not, it is an ancient tradition. Many people have used the stars to navigate by for several years. They often would use like landmarks, seagulls, the ocean swells during the day. They use the stars and the sun to navigate by constantly. In fact, the first recordings of using stars to navigate by was by the Minoans in 3000 BC. This was the first early recordings of being able to use celestial navigation. So this is a several thousand year tradition. In fact, even the Polynesians used this tradition of being able to use the stars to navigate by. They would often travel from the island of Hawaii to Tahiti using nothing but the stars. In fact, the grandest of recordings of using celestial navigation were two events that occurred in the modern times. One was in 1950 by Ernest Schlechten, and he was in the Antarctic Sea when all of a sudden, due to a quick freeze, when his ship was out at the Antarctic Sea, a quick freeze literally froze his ship in the center of the sea. And he couldn't go anywhere, and it started to crack and leak. So he and his crew had to abandon ship. So they literally took their lifeboats and walked across the ice to open sea. And then from there, they traveled about 6,000 miles to get to the nearest island, which was Elephant Island, using nothing but the stars. So this was a humongous feat because the Antarctic Sea is not a kind sea. It often has tremendous storms, as well as it's very cold. So imagine trying to make this trip for 6,000 miles in some of the worst ocean storms, and it's bitterly cold. So this was a humongous feat. And also you had the mutiny on the Bounty, where the ship Bounty had a mutiny going on, and the captain and like about a handful of his crew managed to get into a lifeboat and travel roughly about 8,000 miles to the safest harbor using nothing but the stars, which is a huge feat considering the fact that you were scared out of your wits, wondering if you're going to be tracked. So even to this day, celestial navigation can be used. But speaking of Polynesians, Disney got it right. So when you look at the Disney movie Moana, the art for them is what they call wayfinding. So the art of her sticking her hand up and measuring the distance of stars is a form of celestial navigation. In fact, the constellation that she uses, Maui's fishhook, is an actual real constellation. So Disney got it right. It's not it's the second star to the right and straight on to morning like Peter Pan. No. They actually used a real constellation. They put true to the form of the Polynesian culture. To us, it's called Scorpius, but to the Polynesians, they call it Maui's fishhook. I personally prefer Maui's fishhook because it looks more like a fishhook to me than a scorpion, because you can't really see the claws. Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty of how to do celestial navigation. First of all, know your constellations. There were at least 6 key constellations that were used by ancient mariners in order to be able to navigate the sky with. Those constellations were Ursa Major, Ursa Minor, Cassiopeia, Orion, Crux, and Centaurus. Now, for the sake of San Antonio, we only need about 4 of those constellations since we can't really see Crux and Centaurus that well. But Crux and Centaurus are key to being able to use in the southern hemisphere, so I just wanted to bring them up as well. So figure out where these constellations are, become familiar with the nighttime sky, and know where to find some of these constellations. Because in order to wayfind, to quote Maui, you have to know exactly where you are and where you want to go. And the way to know where you are is to know what's up in the nighttime sky. So know some of your constellations. Step 2, if you're in the northern hemisphere, find the North Star. The easiest way to do it is find Ursa Major, the Great Bear, or its common asterism is referred to as the Big Dipper. I honestly prefer to call it a Big Dipper because it looks more like a big ladle in the sky, but it's often called the plow, it's often called the wagon, it's called by other things as well. So it's up to you what you want to call it. Nonetheless, to find the North Star, if you take the 2 stars at the end of the Big Dipper's bowl and follow them in a straight line, you'll run into the North Star, or Polaris. The great thing about Polaris is in the northern hemisphere, it is barely just a fraction of a degree off of actual true north. That's what makes it an incredibly useful star. All the stars seem to go around the North Star, and the North Star never sets in the northern hemisphere. So it makes it an incredibly useful star for navigation because you can always find it every night, no matter what time of the night. And it's in the same position. So to find your north, find the North Star. Now, if you're in the southern hemisphere, that's a little more tricky, and this is where you start getting into Crux and Centaurus. So there are 2 bright stars in the constellation Centaurus, Rigel Centaurus and Hadar. Those are often referred to as the pointer stars, which point you towards the Southern Cross. Now, the Southern Cross is just a series of 4 stars that are not relatively bright, and then there's that one little extra one right off to the right of it. So sometimes many people often mistake other star formations for the constellation Crux. So the easiest way to find it is find the 2 pointer stars, which are actually relatively bright, and they will point you to Crux. But using Crux and the 2 pointer stars, if you follow them both in kind of in a direct line, so if you take Crux and follow it straight down the bisecting cross, and if you take the 2 pointer stars, go halfway in the middle and then go straight down between them, you'll notice a point that they intersect with, which is about 1 or 2 degrees off of actual true south. So which is really close. So needless to say, using the Southern Cross is not that great, but it's relatively close. But the North Star is even more close. So that's why here in the Northern Hemisphere, we have a huge tool at our side, and it's very useful. Next, find east and west. The great thing is, as soon as you find either north or south, you could just extend your arms outward, and chances are those are east and west. Another way you can figure out where south is, that was used by ancient mariners, is using the constellation Orion. Notice how you have Orion's belt, and then there's this vertical line that shoots downward straight from the belt. This is often referred to as Orion's sword. Right smack dab in the middle of Orion's sword is a beautiful nebula known as the Great Orion Nebula, which is a stellar nursery. Nonetheless, it's, like I said, it's perpendicular, sometimes straight downward, and it points close to south, no matter where its position is as it rises from the east to the west. The sword always points towards the south, so that is always a helpful tool. Also for finding east and west, especially around the equator, the top right star of Orion's belt is called Mintaka, and within a few degrees of east and west, close to the equator, is where the star Mintaka can rise. So it rises roughly about half a degree from due east near the equator, and it sets half a degree due west. So the ancient mariners, when they were crossing from the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere, often use Orion and the star Mintaka. Next, after you find your directions, you need to figure out where your latitude is. Now, in the Northern Hemisphere, the easiest way to do this is to measure the angle of the North Star above the horizon. Now, as I mentioned, the North Star is incredibly useful because it's within a few fractions of a degree close to north. So to be able to measure it from where it is towards the horizon can give you your latitude here on the Earth. And it's relatively close. Now, the way you can do that is, especially for early navigators, they use a tool which is known as a sextant. So you notice the curved end on there is a degree angle to where they take the little telescope end off to the far right, point it at a star, and then measure the degree angle towards the horizon. And that kind of gave them their latitude on the Earth. Now, to use a sextant is kind of a little complicated. In fact, many classes on celestial navigation is dedicated to how to properly use a sextant. But for our sake, if you want just a quick numbers off the top of your head, you can use your hands. Believe it or not, your hands can be used for degrees, give or take. So your pinky is roughly about a degree. Your 3 middle fingers are about 5 degrees. Your fist is 10 degrees. Between your extended pinky and your pointer finger is about 15 degrees. And to do the thumb and the pinky finger is roughly about 25 degrees, give or take. So you can measure roughly about the angle. So the concept where Moana was doing something like that on the horizon, it's pretty similar to using your hands to figure out the degrees above the horizon on particular stars. That can help you find your latitude on the ocean. Now that you've found your latitude, you need to find your longitude, which is a little more tricky because it requires observations of the stars and the sun. The easiest way to do it is compare the sun of what it is at noon versus Greenwich Mean Time. Now, Greenwich Mean Time is important because that's where the prime meridian is. That's where 0 longitude is. And any hours ahead of Greenwich Mean Time or behind Greenwich Mean Time tells you if you're east or west of Greenwich Mean Time. So if you basically compare the sun at noon, which is where it reaches its highest point, and compared it to what the time is at Greenwich Mean Time, how many hours tells you how far west or far east you are. Because 1 hour is roughly about 15 degrees from the prime meridian. So for every hour you're ahead or every hour you're behind tells you how many 15-degree increments you are from the prime meridian. This is why we have time zones. So if you look at the map of the United States in the area, it's kind of roughly in that area to where the +6 hours is within that time zone from Greenwich Mean Time. Now, granted, not every country and state follows along the time zones. In fact, if you look at China, China's all one time zone, no matter what. So, but this is a rough idea in terms of where we get our time zones. Like, for example, why we have Mountain, Pacific, Central, and Eastern time zones in the United States. It's just because of how many hours west we are from the prime meridian. So this gives you your longitude and your latitude and gives you a rough position. And of course, next, use some of the resources that you have available to you. For many celestial navigators, they use what is known as the Nautical Almanac, which is a beautiful long almanac that lists all the stars and their positions on given dates and times, as well as using navigational star charts. Know which constellations are up by using different star charts that are available, and to be able to kind of measure the degree angles above the horizon for particular stars. And of course, knowing how to use a sextant. And obviously, yes, you can use your cell phones or GPSs to be able to find your location, but sometimes you're in areas or locations that you can't get good reception or anything of that nature. So sometimes you have to use the resources available to you. And also perhaps a compass, as long as you're not near anything that's metallic that could cause the compass to go awry. So these are the bare bone basics of celestial navigation and how to be able to use the stars to find your positions. Like I said, this is just a broad introductory topic. But if you'd like to learn more, I definitely recommend looking into some different classes, as well as there's several books and lectures on this material as well. If you have another topic you would like for me to cover over, leave it down in the comments below. If there's anything that you would like for me to do, like if you want me to do a live presentation or would like to do another telescope viewing, leave it down in the comments below as well. And until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and as always, never stop learning.